The conference room went silent when Mr. Sterling singled me out. My presentation slides, meticulously prepared, vanished from the screen, replaced by a glaring red arrow. "You call this professional, Miller?" he drawled, eyeing the room. The promotion I'd craved felt like ash. "Some people," he added, "just aren't cut out for the big leagues." Annie reflected on her stable, 7-year relationship with David, 5 years married. David was kind, dependable, and predictable. She remembered their easy connection at a barbecue, David's careful burger flipping. Their life had settled into comfortable, blissful routines like Sunday brunches and movie nights. 6 months prior, Annie secured a new job at a prestigious marketing firm. The office environment was sleek, modern, and filled with young, ambitious professionals. She felt a new rush of excitement, a distinct change from her former routine. Her new colleagues were loud, outgoing, always planning happy hours and engaging in constant banter. Annie initially felt like a quiet outsider, but was determined to assimilate. She began subtle adaptations, feigning laughter, staying out later, and increasing her alcohol consumption. 7 years I'd been with David Olson, 5 of them as his wife. The number felt solid, like a well-built stone wall, each year stacked carefully on the last. David was stability personified. He worked at the same accounting firm he joined right out of college, drove a sensible sedan, and always remembered to put out the recycling bins on Tuesday nights. He was kind, truly, and dependable in a way that made you feel safe, tucked away from the sharp edges of the world. Not the most exciting guy, maybe, but a good man. That was the phrase my mother used, always with a nod of approval. I first saw him at a backyard barbecue, sweat beading on his forehead as he meticulously turned bratwursts on a borrowed grill. Everyone else was shouting, laughing, beer cans clinking. But David moved with a quiet precision, focused on not burning the meat. He wore a sensible plaid shirt, faded at the elbows, his hands steady as he turned the patties. I remembered watching him, a strange calm in the chaos. We talked about the weather, then the best way to get grill marks just right. And then, somehow, an hour had passed. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic spark, just an easy connection, like 2 puzzle pieces finally finding their spot. Our life together quickly settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sunday mornings meant coffee on the porch swing, then pancakes at the diner down on Elm Street. Friday nights were reserved for movie rentals and a big bowl of popcorn on the couch, David usually falling asleep halfway through. He'd leave little notes for me sometimes, stuck to the fridge with a magnet. "Love you, honey. Don't forget your lunch." Small gestures, predictable, but they built a kind of quiet bliss. It was a life I thought I wanted, a safe harbor against the rough currents I'd always heard about. Then, 6 months ago, everything shifted. I landed the job at Sterling & Finch, a marketing firm downtown. It was a prestigious place, the kind where people wore tailored suits and spoke in terms of synergy and disruption. The building itself was a monument to ambition, all glass and polished steel, 20 stories up. The air inside felt different, sharper, almost electric, humming with a different kind of energy than the quiet hum of our house. It was a world away from David's steady accounting ledgers and my old routine. A new rush of excitement coursed through me, a feeling like stretching after being cramped for too long. My new colleagues were younger, mostly, and vibrantly alive. They talked fast, laughed loud, and seemed to always be heading somewhere, even if it was just to the communal kitchen for artisanal coffee. Happy hour was a religion, a sacred ritual observed every Thursday, sometimes Tuesday, or Wednesday too. They debated pop culture, international politics, and the latest startup failures with equal, boisterous enthusiasm. Banter was their native tongue, a quick-witted back and forth I found myself constantly struggling to keep up with. I felt like a quiet kid again, observing from the sidelines. They all seemed to have known each other forever, a tight-knit club I was outside of. But I was determined to fit in. This was my chance, I told myself, to be someone new, someone more. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I started to adapt. I laughed a little louder at jokes I didn't quite understand, or that didn't strike me as particularly funny. I started staying out later after work, joining the exodus to the bar down the street, even when I knew David would be home, making dinner alone. One drink turned into two, then sometimes three, blurring the edges of the unfamiliar and making the conversations flow a little easier. Annie's first major presentation at Sterling and Finch achieved success. The team celebrated the achievement at a popular, trendy bar. As the drinks flowed, conversations naturally shifted towards personal relationships. Brenda, an account executive, directly questioned Annie about her husband, David. Annie hesitated, then described David as kind of boring, actually. The group at the table erupted in laughter, causing Annie to feel a peculiar mix of guilt and excitement. Emboldened by the reception, Annie began to invent humorous stories about David, like his spice rack organization. She purposefully omitted any mention of his genuine, thoughtful gestures, such as a romantic weekend trip or a special necklace. Annie continued to share exaggerated tales, reveling in the attention and additional laughter they generated. She stumbled home much later than usual, well past midnight, feeling a lingering buzz. Beneath the buzz, a persistent, gnawing sense of guilt began to settle in. David was already asleep, but he had left a plate of her favorite chocolate chip cookies. A small note lay beside the cookies. "Hope your presentation went well. Proud of you, honey." Annie stared at the handwritten message, her guilt intensifying, but quickly dismissed it. She rationalized her actions, telling herself that everyone vents about their partners sometimes. My first big presentation for Sterling and Finch went off without a hitch. The slides were clean, my delivery was steady, and Mr. Sterling even gave a rare, almost imperceptible nod at the end. The relief was a physical thing, like a tight knot in my chest finally unraveling. That evening, the whole team piled into cabs, heading for a place called The Den, a bar downtown with exposed brick and craft cocktails. The music was loud, the kind with a heavy bass line that vibrated through the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of citrus and expensive gin. It felt electric, a stark contrast to the quiet evenings David and I usually spent. Drinks flowed, and the conversation became looser, louder. We talked about sales targets, then a funny office anecdote, and then, as it always seemed to do in these situations, it drifted to relationships. Mark was complaining about his girlfriend's obsession with reality TV. Chloe was recounting a disastrous blind date. I just listened, nursing my second gin and tonic, trying to figure out where I fit in. Then Brenda, an account executive with sharp eyes and an even sharper wit, turned to me. "So, Annie," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "What's David like?" "Your husband. Never hear much about him." I hesitated. "David. What was David like?" The image of him, carefully separating the darks from the lights on laundry day, or humming to himself as he washed dishes, flashed in my mind. He was steady. He was kind. He was predictable. "Oh, you know," I heard myself say, the words feeling alien even as they left my lips. "He's kind of boring, actually." The table erupted. Not a cruel laughter, but a surprised, boisterous kind. It was the sound of a barrier breaking, of being let into an inside joke. I felt a strange heat rise in my cheeks, a mix of shame and something else, something almost like exhilaration. I'd said it, out loud, and they weren't judging me. They were laughing with me. Emboldened by the reception, a new kind of energy surged through me. It was easy, almost too easy, to exaggerate. "He reorganizes the spice rack every Sunday," I said, a little louder. "Alphabetical. Then by expiration date. And don't even get me started on his sock drawer. It's color-coded, by fabric type." More laughter. Mark slapped his knee. "No way. Miller. You're kidding me." I wasn't, not entirely, but I wasn't telling the whole truth either. I conveniently left out the details that would paint a different picture. The surprise weekend getaway he'd planned for my birthday last year. A quiet cabin up north, just the two of us. Or the delicate silver necklace he'd bought me. Just because he saw it and thought of me. Wrapped in a small velvet box on my pillow. Those things didn't fit the narrative I was building. the one that made me seem more like them, less tied down by quiet domesticity. I kept going, one fabricated tale after another, each one eliciting more laughs, more attention. David timing his commute down to the second, his insistence on using coasters for everything, his earnest attempts to fix things around the house that usually ended with him calling a handyman. Each story was a small shard of him, twisted and polished for comedic effect, offered up to this new crowd. They hung on my words, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly part of something. It was well past midnight when I finally stumbled out of the cab, the cool night air hitting me like a splash of cold water. The buzz from the drinks was still there, a pleasant hum behind my eyes, but beneath it, a nagging sensation had started to form. It was a dull throb, a faint echo of discomfort. The house was dark, quiet, a stark contrast to the lively bar. I moved through the living room, past the sofa, where David often fell asleep during movies, and into the kitchen. The counter was clean, just as he always left it. But there, on a small plate, were two of my favorite chocolate chip cookies, still slightly warm. Beside them, a folded note. David's neat, slightly slanting handwriting. Hope your presentation went well. Proud of you, honey. I stared at the words, the guilt growing heavier. A tight knot now forming lower in my stomach. The sweetness of the cookies felt cloying, but I pushed the feeling down, hard. Everyone vents, I told myself. Picking up a cookie. Everyone exaggerates. It was just harmless fun. The following day at work, Annie's colleagues continued to chuckle about her stories. Brenda, an account executive, remarked that David sounded like a character and suggested bringing him to the next office party. Annie forced a smile, feeling a sudden surge of panic at the idea of David meeting her work friends. She quickly deflected the suggestion, saying, "Oh yeah, totally. Maybe next time." Weeks then settled into a discernible pattern, with Annie becoming Fun Annie at work, known for her hilariously boring husband. She regularly shared exaggerated tales, relishing the approval and attention from her colleagues. At home, Annie attempted to maintain her usual self, but a constant, quiet sense of guilt began to gnaw at her. She convinced herself that her work life and home life were separate and would not affect her relationship with David. Slowly and insidiously, changes started to emerge. Annie began staying late at the office, inventing excuses to delay going home. When she was home, she often appeared distracted, frequently checking her phone for messages from her new work friends. David, naturally, noticed these changes and gently inquired if everything was all right. Annie consistently brushed off his concerns, assuring him, "Just busy with work, honey. Thanks for watching." Braugrim sued. The next morning, the office felt brighter, more welcoming. Coffee steamed in ceramic mugs, and the low hum of conversation was punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. It seemed my stories from the den had made the rounds. Mark grinned at me from across the cubicle wall. Still thinking about that color-coded sock drawer. "Miller," he called out, and a few others chuckled. A warmth spread through my chest, a different kind of warmth than David's quiet pride. This felt sharp, immediate, validating. Brenda swung by my desk later, her bright scarf a splash of color against her charcoal suit. She leaned against the partition, a knowing smirk on her face. "Your husband sounds like such a character, Annie," she said, then added, "You'll have to bring him to the next office party. We'd all love to meet the man behind the legendary spice rack." My smile felt like it stretched too tight across my face. A sudden, cold panic gripped me. A quick rush of blood to my head. David here? Amidst the loud music, the slick jokes, the relentless ambition, the thought of him, with his sensible shoes and earnest conversation, trying to navigate this world, sent a shiver down my spine. They would see him, truly see him, and then they would see me. The whole careful facade would crack. "Oh yeah, totally." I managed, the words a practiced reflex. "Maybe next time. He's, really busy with his accounting stuff." The lie felt smooth, easy. Weeks turned into a pattern, as predictable as David's Tuesday night recycling ritual. At work, I was Fun Annie, the one with the hilariously boring husband. A shorthand had developed, a kind of inside joke that always included me. Someone would mention organization, and an eye would wink my way. I'd offer up another tidbit, another exaggerated detail about David's orderly life. His insistence on separate towels for faces and hands, his careful stacking of old newspapers, each story, each small betrayal, brought a fresh wave of laughter, a renewed sense of belonging. I basked in it. In the knowing smiles and the nods of approval, it felt like being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long time. But at home, the warmth faded. I tried to be the same Annie, the one who watched movies with David and talked about her day. But a quiet gnaw had settled in, a persistent hum beneath the surface. It wasn't a sharp pain, just a constant, dull ache, like an undigested meal. I'd catch myself looking at David, seeing him through the eyes of my colleagues, and a faint blush would creep up my neck. I told myself it was fine, that work and home were separate worlds, like two different countries with their own languages. What happened in one didn't affect the other. It didn't affect us, but slowly, insidiously, changes began. The happy hours stretched longer. "Just one more round, Annie," Brenda would say, and I'd find myself nodding, texting David some vague excuse about a late client meeting or urgent project deadlines. The words came effortlessly. I preferred the bright, buzzing energy of the bar, the easy camaraderie, to the quiet hum of our living room. It was easier to be fun Annie than the Annie grappling with that nagging guilt. When I was home, I was often distracted. My phone, a slick rectangle of glass and metal, was a constant companion, illuminating my face in the dim light of the living room. Messages from work friends would pop up, a funny meme, a quick question about tomorrow's agenda, an invitation for an impromptu lunch. I'd find myself scrolling through my work group chat, a small smile playing on my lips, while David recounted his day from the accounting firm. I'd nod, offering non-committal, my attention somewhere else entirely. Of course, David noticed. He was quiet, but he wasn't blind. "Everything okay, honey?" he'd ask sometimes, his voice soft, a hint of concern in his steady gaze. "You seem a little tired lately." Or, "You're on your phone a lot." I'd brush him off with a quick kiss, a pat on the arm. "Just busy with work, honey," I'd say, the words a shield, efficient and impenetrable. Big projects ramping up at Sterling and Finch. He'd just nod, accepting, never pushing. That was David. Dependable. Trusting. And I was learning just how easy it was to take advantage of that. 3 months into her new job, David surprised Annie with a homemade dinner. He meticulously prepared her favorite dishes, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and even attempted a chocolate soufflé. The dining table was carefully set, with lit candles, and soft music played in the background. Annie, genuinely touched, asked David the reason for the special occasion. David smiled gently, but a hint of sadness lingered in his eyes as he mentioned their recent lack of connection. He proposed having a special evening together to reconnect. Annie was overcome by a powerful wave of guilt, starkly contrasting his loving effort with her own recent betrayals. They shared a lovely dinner, which, for a few hours, felt reminiscent of their earlier times together. She remembered David's quiet strength and his unwavering kindness. However, a persistent inner voice questioned, "What would my coworkers say? How can I spin this for a laugh?" The very thought of this made her feel physically sick. The next day at work, Scott from accounting light-heartedly inquired about David's latest boring activity. Annie briefly considered sharing details of the beautiful dinner but found herself unable to speak the words. Instead, she claimed David had spent the weekend alphabetizing spices and color-coding his tie collection. The group laughed, and Annie forced a smile, feeling a profound sense of self-loathing. Catching her reflection in a glass partition, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. It was about 3 months into my new job at Sterling and Finch, well past the initial probationary period, when I walked through the front door one Tuesday evening. The day had been long. Another happy hour had bled into dinner with Brenda and Mark, and my head still throbbed faintly from a quick third glass of wine. I was expecting the usual quiet, Maybe the smell of a frozen pizza David had heated for himself. Instead, a complex aroma hit me the moment I stepped inside. The faint char of grilling, the sweetness of something roasted, and a rich, almost chocolatey scent. The dining room table, usually reserved for bills and old magazines, was transformed. 2 tall white candles flickered in the center, casting a soft, dancing glow. Our good china, the set we only used for Thanksgiving, was laid out. A low, unfamiliar classical melody drifted from the small Bluetooth speaker on the bookshelf, and there was David, standing by the stove, a slight smudge of flour on his cheek, carefully plating a piece of perfectly grilled salmon. Roasted asparagus lay beside it, still vibrant green. In a small ramekin on the counter, I saw the deflated, slightly uneven peak of a chocolate soufflé. He'd actually attempted it. "What's all this for?" I asked, genuinely taken aback, the words softer than I'd intended. A warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last vestiges of the office buzz. It was a genuine gesture, the kind I hadn't seen in a while. David turned, a nervous smile playing on his lips. He looked a little flushed from the heat of the stove. His hair slightly rumpled, but beneath the smile, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something else in his eyes. A hint of sadness, or maybe just a deep weariness. "No special reason," he said, his voice a little quiet. He gestured vaguely around the room. I feel like we haven't been connecting much lately, you know? With the new job and everything. Thought it'd be nice to just have a special evening. Together." The words hit me, not with a bang, but like a slow, cold wave, rising up to engulf me. Guilt, heavy and suffocating, settled in my stomach. Here was David, putting in this effort, meticulously planning, cooking my favorite things, trying to bridge the growing chasm between us, and all I had given him in return were my half-truths, my fabricated stories, the slow, insidious betrayal. The contrast was stark, almost unbearable. His loving effort, quiet and sincere, felt like a judgment against my recent actions. We sat down, and David poured us each a glass of white wine. For a few hours, it felt like old times. We talked, really talked, about his day at the firm, about a tricky tax case he was working on. I even found myself genuinely interested. I watched him, listening to his steady, thoughtful voice, and remembered why I'd fallen for him. His quiet strength, his genuine kindness. The way he always considered my feelings. He was a good man. A truly good man. The dinner was lovely, the conversation easy, and for a short while, the gnawing guilt receded. But as the candles burned down and the night deepened, a familiar, unwelcome voice began to whisper at the edges of my mind. What would my coworkers say about this? About the candles, the soufflé, the quiet romance? A more insidious thought followed, sharp and unwelcome. How can I spin this into something they'd find funny? Another anecdote about David's earnest, predictable efforts. The thought made my stomach clench, a cold knot forming deep inside me. The fact that I was even thinking about it, about taking this genuine, vulnerable moment and twisting it for a laugh, made me feel physically sick. The next day, the office felt particularly loud, the coffee bitter in my mug. Scott from accounting ambled over to my desk. He leaned against the partition, a playful smirk on his face. "So, Miller," he drawled. "What did the hubby do this time? Reorganize his stamp collection into chronological order? Or did he finally alphabetize the cereal boxes?" I hesitated. For a split second, I considered it. Telling them about the candles, the perfectly grilled salmon, the slightly collapsed but still sweet chocolate soufflé, about the look in David's eyes when he said he wanted to reconnect. But the words wouldn't come. They felt too soft, too intimate for this bright, hard-edged room. They wouldn't understand. They would probably just find it sentimental, or worse, boring. And I was fun Annie now. Instead, I heard myself say, the lie slipping out with practiced ease, "Oh, you know, same old David. Spent the whole weekend alphabetizing his spice rack again, I think, and decided his tie collection needed color coding, by fabric type." Naturally, the group around us laughed. a loud collective roar that bounced off the glass walls. My own smile felt thin, brittle. I forced it, the muscles in my face aching. The laughter filled the air, but this time, it felt hollow, cold, ringing with a deep, private shame. I felt worse than ever before. Later, walking past the conference room, I caught my reflection in the polished glass partition. The woman staring back was familiar, yet utterly foreign, her eyes a little too bright, her smile a little too forced. I barely recognized her. Days turned into weeks. The destructive cycle of Annie's dual life continued. At work, Annie was the vivacious storyteller, constantly fabricating new tales about David's supposed dullness. At home, she grew increasingly distant and preoccupied, consumed by her work persona. David, with his characteristic quiet patience, persistently tried to bridge their widening emotional gap. Annie, however, was too focused on gaining external validation to truly acknowledge his efforts. One pivotal Friday evening, approximately 5 months into her new job, her carefully constructed world began to crumble. She found herself at another office happy hour, entertaining colleagues with increasingly embellished stories of David's meticulous home organization. Slightly slurring, she joked about David creating a spreadsheet to monitor their toilet paper consumption. The table erupted in laughter, and Annie, caught up in the moment, failed to notice a familiar figure approaching. Standing just a few feet away, his face a chilling mask of shock and profound hurt, was David. He had come to surprise her, intending to take her out for a quiet dinner. The laughter around Annie abruptly died as her eyes met her husband's. The raw pain and deep betrayal evident in his gaze instantly sobered her. Without uttering a single word, David turned and silently walked out of the bar, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Annie, ignoring her confused colleagues' calls, scrambled to follow him. Days bled into weeks, then into months, each one building on the last, solidifying a pattern that felt both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. At Sterling and Finch, I was Fun Annie, the animated storyteller, always ready with a new tale about my hilariously dull husband. His habit of organizing our laundry by fiber content, his meticulous tracking of household expenses in a leather-bound ledger, even his quiet pride in a perfectly mowed lawn, all became fodder. Each story, spun with a practiced comedic timing, earned me a fresh burst of laughter, a deeper sense of acceptance among my colleagues. The applause, the knowing glances, the feeling of being genuinely liked, had become a potent drug. At home, the transformation was almost complete. I was a phantom, moving through the rooms, present, but not truly there. My mind was always elsewhere, replaying a witty exchange from the office, drafting a text to Brenda, or mentally preparing for the next day's meeting. David, with his quiet endurance, tried his best to bridge the ever-widening gap between us. He'd suggest a walk in the park on a Saturday, or bring home my favorite takeout on a Tuesday. He'd leave small notes, make my coffee just right, or simply sit on the couch beside me, offering a quiet presence. But I, consumed by my craving for external validation, for the sharp, immediate gratification of a laugh, failed to notice. Or perhaps, I chose not to. Such small, almost invisible choices, I thought, but they were laying down the track for something far bigger than I understood then. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. It was a Friday evening, roughly 5 months into my new job. The bar was packed, the air thick with the smell of beer and fried food. My colleagues and I were huddled around a sticky high-top table, 3 rounds deep into happy hour. The conversation was loud, boisterous, and I was holding court, regaling them with increasingly exaggerated stories of David's home organization. The latest one, I thought, was a stroke of genius. You guys, I slurred slightly, the gin and tonic making my words a little fuzzy. You won't believe what David did last weekend. He actually created a spreadsheet to track our toilet paper usage, said we needed to optimize consumption and minimize waste. I punctuated the punchline with a wide, triumphant grin. The table erupted. Mark nearly choked on his beer, Brenda clapped her hands, and even Chloe, usually reserved, let out a loud snort. Their laughter was a wave, washing over me, affirming me, telling me I was witty, I was entertaining, I was one of them. I was too caught up in the moment, too high on the rush of approval, to notice the subtle shift in the background noise, the slight parting of the crowd near the entrance. Then, through the haze of alcohol and exhilaration, I saw him, standing just a few feet away, framed by the neon glow of the bar sign, was David. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his sensible khaki pants, a familiar slight hunch to his shoulders. But his face was a mask I had never seen before. Shock, profound hurt, and something else, a deep, wounded bewilderment, were etched across his features. His eyes, usually steady and calm, were wide, glistening. He had come to surprise me, I knew then. A quiet dinner probably planned. A hopeful attempt to lure me away from the bright lights and loud laughter. The laughter around me faded, slowly at first, then abruptly, as if someone had cut the sound. My colleagues, following my gaze, had gone silent, their faces shifting from amusement to discomfort. The music, which had seemed so loud moments before, now felt like a distant, dull thrum. My eyes locked with David's. All the gin, all the artificial bravado, drained from me in an instant, leaving me cold and utterly sober. The raw pain, the deep, gut-wrenching betrayal I saw in his gaze, was like a physical blow. It was the moment the world tilted. The carefully constructed facade collapsing in a single, devastating second. Without a single word, without a sound, David turned. His movement was slow, deliberate, as if each step was a heavy effort. He just turned, his back to me, and walked out of the bar, disappearing into the Friday night crowd. He left a stunned silence in his wake, a heavy, suffocating vacuum where laughter had been. "Annie?" I heard Brenda's confused voice. Then Mark's. "What the hell?" But I ignored them. The world narrowed to David's retreating figure. "David!" I scrambled, pushing past the table, the chairs, the suddenly unfamiliar faces of my colleagues, desperate to follow him. Annie caught up to David in the dimly lit parking lot, noting his slumped shoulders. He turned, his face etched with a chilling, profound pain. Revealing he had come to surprise her, David confirmed he heard everything. The toilet paper joke, the spice rack, all her fabricated stories. Annie attempted to apologize, trying to dismiss her words as just jokes, but even to herself, they felt hollow. David simply shook his head, stating, "You made me a punchline, Annie, to strangers." He got into his truck, informing her he would be staying at his cousin's for a while. He drove away, leaving Annie alone in the cold, the sudden emptiness mirroring her internal state. Back in their apartment, Annie's calls and texts to David went unanswered, met only by silence. The silence in their home felt deafening, a stark contrast to the office chatter she had once craved. The following week at work, the atmosphere was palpably heavy, with colleagues exchanging awkward glances and whispers. The fun Annie persona she had cultivated shattered, revealing a raw, exposed woman beneath. She began to slowly comprehend the immense magnitude of her actions and the trust she had carelessly broken. The cool night air hit me with a jolt as I burst out of the den. The city hummed with Friday night traffic, the distant wail of a siren cutting through the din. I spotted him immediately, a solitary figure under the orange glow of a street lamp in the dimly lit parking lot across the street. His shoulders were slumped, his posture conveying a defeat more profound than any shout could. "David!" I called out, my voice ragged, raw. He turned, slowly, as if the movement itself was an effort. The light from the street lamp caught his face, illuminating the lines of exhaustion and the deep, raw pain etched across his features. It was a look that chilled me to the bone, a pain I had inflicted. "I was going to surprise you," he said, his voice flat, hollow, devoid of its usual warmth. "Take you to the diner." Our diner. My stomach clenched. Our diner. The one where we had our Sunday brunches. The one where he always ordered the same thing. 2 eggs over easy, bacon crisp. "David." I started. But he cut me off, a small, weary shake of his head. "I heard you, Annie," he said, his gaze unwavering, cutting through me. "Everything. The toilet paper. The spice rack. All of it." His voice held no anger, only a profound, heartbreaking weariness. I felt a sudden desperate urge to explain it away, to minimize, to make it disappear. It was just jokes, David, I pleaded, the words tumbling out. Office humor. I didn't mean anything by it. You know I love you, but even as I said them, they felt weak, flimsy, utterly dishonest. The words caught in my throat, choking me. He shook his head again, a slow, deliberate movement that spoke volumes. You made me a punchline, Annie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. To strangers. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He didn't have to. The quiet accusation was far more devastating than any outburst could have been. He walked past me, towards his old Ford pickup truck, parked under a dying oak tree. The truck looked suddenly small, vulnerable. Like him, he opened the door, the familiar creak echoing in the night. I'm going to stay at my cousin's place for a while, he said, not looking at me, his voice still flat. He climbed in, the door shutting with a heavy thud. The engine sputtered to life, a low rumble that felt like a prelude to permanent silence. I stood frozen, watching as the taillights glowed red, then receded into the darkness, turning the corner and vanishing. He was gone, the cold bit into my skin. The sudden emptiness of the parking lot, of the night, felt like a stark mirror to the sudden, aching emptiness in my heart. The cacophony of the bar, the laughter, the music. All seemed impossibly far away now. A distant, meaningless echo. I walked home, the apartment feeling vast and unfamiliar. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the constant office chatter. The happy hour banter I had craved so desperately. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. I called him. It went straight to voicemail. I texted, David, please, let me explain. I'm so sorry. David, please come home. David. I didn't mean it. Message after message, sent into the void. All unanswered. The blue check marks appeared, confirming he'd seen them, but no reply ever came. The following week at work was a blur of heavy silences and awkward glances. My colleagues, usually so boisterous, spoke in hushed tones, or avoided my gaze entirely. Brenda and Mark tried to act normal, but their forced cheerfulness felt brittle. And the laughter was gone. The fun Annie persona, the one I had meticulously crafted and desperately clung to, had shattered, leaving behind a raw, exposed woman. Every conversation felt like a judgment, every averted eye a confirmation of my shame. I walked through the sleek, modern office, past the glass partitions, seeing my reflection in the polished surfaces. The woman looking back was haggard, her eyes shadowed, her smile gone. The emptiness inside me grew with each passing hour. Slowly, painfully, I began to grasp the true magnitude of what I had done. The precious, fragile trust I had carelessly broken. All for a few cheap laughs. It wasn't just a joke, it was a wound. A deep, gashing wound I might never be able to heal. Annie, consumed by desperation, relentlessly tried to win David back with heartfelt letters and voicemail apologies. After a week of profound silence, David finally agreed to meet her for coffee at their familiar diner near the highway. Their conversation was heavily strained, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences that amplified the tension. David expressed his feelings of utter betrayal and deep humiliation, emphasizing the casual cruelty of her actions. Annie poured out her heart, confessing her deep-seated insecurity and desperate need for validation from her new colleagues. David listened, his gaze distant, acknowledging her pain but unable to shake the vivid image of her mocking him. He suggested they needed significant time apart, hinting at counseling as a last resort if any hope remained. Annie, clinging to any glimmer of possibility, agreed to counseling. Terrified at the prospect of losing him permanently, their initial therapy sessions proved exceptionally difficult, filled with raw, unfiltered emotions and simmering, unspoken resentments. David openly struggled to rebuild his trust in her, the fresh wound of public humiliation still painfully festering. Annie began to truly comprehend the profound depth of her damage, not only to David but also to her own integrity and sense of self. The days after David left stretched into a week that felt like an eternity. Each morning, I woke to the same deafening silence, the hollow ache in my chest a constant reminder. I wrote letters, pages filled with frantic apologies and desperate explanations, sliding them under his cousin's door, knowing he wouldn't open them. I left voicemails, my voice cracking, pleading with him to just talk to me, to give me a chance. Each unanswered call, each unread text, chipped away at the fragile hope I tried to hold on to. The office, once a source of validation, now felt like a sterile, unwelcoming space. The laughter I once craved now sounded tinny, distant, a painful echo of my folly. Then, a week after that Friday night, my phone buzzed. It was David. A text, short and to the point. Coffee. Saturday. 10 a.m. The diner. Relief washed over me. A physical tremor. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a crack in the wall. Saturday morning, the diner near the highway looked the same, smelled the same. Stale coffee, burnt toast, a faint sweetness from the pastry case. But everything felt different. David was already there, in our usual booth, nursing a black coffee. He looked tired, older somehow, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. His gaze was distant, fixed on the rain streaking down the window. Our conversation was strained, an awkward dance around the gaping wound between us. Long silences hung in the air, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery from other tables and the hiss of the espresso machine. He finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "I feel utterly betrayed, Annie," he said, not looking at me, and humiliated. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual cruelty of it all. You, laughing, with them, about me. He stirred his coffee, though it had long gone cold. You made me a joke. The honesty of his words was a cold shower. I poured out my heart, a torrent of confessions. I was so insecure, David, I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. I wanted to fit in. They were so different, so loud. I wanted them to like me. I needed the validation. I didn't think. I just went along. I told him about the pressure, the fear of being seen as the quiet kid again. The desperate need to prove myself. It sounded weak, pathetic, even to my own ears. David listened, his gaze still distant, focused on something beyond the diner window. He nodded occasionally, a slow, deliberate movement. "I understand you felt that way," he said, his voice flat, "but that doesn't make what you did any less painful." He picked up his mug, tracing the rim with his thumb. "I can't just shake the image of you, making fun of me to them. It's stuck." He paused, then took a deep breath. "I think we need some time apart, Annie. Really apart. And maybe," he looked at me then, his eyes holding a fragile, weary hope, "maybe counseling. If there's any hope left." The words "time apart" struck fear into me, a cold hand squeezing my heart, but counseling felt like a lifeline, however thin. "Yes," I said quickly, my voice raspy. "Yes, David, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you." The thought of him walking out of my life for good, of the silence becoming permanent, was unbearable. Our initial therapy sessions were difficult, a grueling excavation of raw emotions and unspoken resentments. Dr. Evans, a kind woman with tired eyes, patiently guided us through the wreckage. David struggled to articulate the full depth of his hurt, the wound of public humiliation still fresh and festering. He sat across from me, his arms often crossed, his gaze wary. "How do I trust you won't do it again?" he'd ask, his voice quiet but firm. "How do I know that when you walk out that door, I won't be the punchline somewhere else?" His words cut through me every time. I saw, with a clarity that stung, the depth of my damage, not just to David, to his trust, to his quiet dignity, but to my own integrity. The fun Annie I'd created at work had been built on a foundation of lies and a betrayal of the man I loved. And the woman left behind, the one staring back from Dr. Evans's office, felt broken, exposed, and utterly unsure of who she was anymore. Despite their efforts in counseling, the emotional distance between Annie and David persisted as a vast chasm. Annie felt intensely lonely, vulnerable, and profoundly misunderstood, continually haunted by her past errors. At work, Mark Johnson, a charming new senior manager, provided her with solace and a willing, attentive ear. He complimented her intelligence and ambition, qualities she felt David no longer recognized in her. Desperate for a connection and to feel valued, Annie began an emotional affair with Mark. Their late-night texts and working dinners rapidly intensified, blurring professional boundaries. The emotional affair inevitably escalated into a physical one, a desperate, misguided attempt to feel wanted. The guilt became immense, a crushing weight, yet Annie felt trapped in a cycle of poor choices and superficial validation. David, still deeply hurt but highly perceptive, sensed a profound shift in Annie, noticing renewed evasiveness and more unexplained late nights. He confronted her, having discovered a series of compromising texts on her old, discarded work phone. Annie, cornered and utterly broken, confessed to the affair, irrevocably shattering any fragile hope for reconciliation. The confession hung heavy in the air, a final, irreparable crack in the very foundation of their marriage. The counseling sessions continued, week after agonizing week. But the emotional distance between David and me remained a chasm, wide and deep. We spoke, yes, but the words felt like pebbles dropped into a bottomless well. He was still hurt, still guarded, and I was still trying to earn back a trust I'd shattered. The apartment, even when he was there, felt profoundly lonely. I carried my past mistakes with me, a heavy, invisible backpack, feeling vulnerable, misunderstood, and utterly exhausted. It was during this period that Mark Johnson joined Sterling and Finch. He was a new senior manager, brought in from out of state. With a quick smile and an easy confidence, he quickly became the office's unofficial therapist, always ready with a witty remark or a thoughtful observation. He seemed to see me, truly see me, in a way I felt David no longer did. He'd lean against my cubicle wall, his voice low, complimenting my intelligence, my ambition, the way I handled a tricky client. "You've got a real fire in you, Annie," he'd say, his eyes warm. "Don't let anyone dim it." I was desperate for a connection, for someone to make me feel valued again, to quiet the gnawing insecurity that had become my constant companion. So, I started listening, and then I started talking. Our conversations stretched, first during lunch, then after meetings. He listened intently, offered advice, and made me laugh, a genuine, unburdened laugh I hadn't realized I'd missed. An emotional affair began, subtly at first, a slow drip of shared confidences. His attention felt like a warm blanket against the cold loneliness I'd been living in. Our late-night texts, initially about work, quickly blurred. They evolved into longer, more personal exchanges, sharing details of our lives, our dreams, our disappointments. The working dinners became more frequent. Always just the two of us. Always with the unspoken understanding that it was more than just business. I told myself it was harmless, just friendship, a much-needed outlet. But the guilt, that familiar, unwelcome companion, was a dull throb beneath the surface, growing with each stolen glance, each hushed conversation. The emotional affair, like a slow-burning fuse, inevitably spiraled into a physical one. It was a desperate, misguided attempt to feel wanted, to feel alive, to escape the crushing weight of my mistakes. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session, I found myself in a hotel bar with Mark. One drink led to another. His hand lingered on mine. His eyes held a promise of escape. The next morning, I woke to a fresh wave of immense, crushing guilt, a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I hated myself for it, for repeating the same pattern of bad choices, for seeking superficial validation in the arms of a man who saw me only through the lens of a fleeting fantasy. I felt trapped, caught in a cycle I didn't know how to break. David, still hurting, still observant, sensed a deeper shift in me. My evasiveness, which had receded slightly during our early counseling, returned with a vengeance. The late nights became more frequent. My excuses, more elaborate. He asked fewer questions, but his eyes held a watchful, wounded quality. Then came the night it all shattered again. I had left my old work phone, the one with the group chats and texts from my initial happy hour days, charging on the kitchen counter. I'd forgotten to clear the messages, too focused on the newer model in my purse. I was in the shower when I heard him. Not a shout, not a slam, just a quiet, strangled sound, like a gasp of pain. I stepped out, wrapping a towel around me, my heart pounding. David was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa, my old phone clutched in his hand. His face was ashen, the color drained from it, and his eyes, when they met mine, were filled with a raw, undeniable despair. On the screen, I saw them. The compromising texts, the veiled plans, the intimate exchanges with Mark. Cornered, broken, there was no more denying, no more explaining away. The truth, stark and ugly, hung in the air between us. I had an affair, David, I whispered, the words tearing through me. The confession was a physical weight, dropping onto the fragile hope we had been desperately trying to piece back together. The silence that followed was heavy, final. It was the sound of a foundation cracking, irreparably. David reacted to Annie's confession with profound, quiet heartbreak, rather than anger. He recognized that their trust was not merely broken, but utterly, irrevocably destroyed. He calmly informed Annie he could not forgive this second, deeper betrayal and ultimate disrespect. The following week, David systematically began moving his personal belongings out of their shared apartment. Annie remained alone in the gradually emptying space, watching their life together disappear. Her performance at work sharply declined under the weight of her personal chaos, and the office culture became cold and gossipy. Eventually, she lost her job, the very source of the superficial validation that had led to her downfall. She began to reflect on the devastating cost of her choices: a lost husband, a ruined career, and a shattered reputation. Sitting alone in the barren apartment, staring at the empty spaces, she was forced to confront the moral consequences of her pursuit of fleeting approval. Annie finally understood the hollowness of her fun Annie persona and the genuine goodness she had foolishly sacrificed. The story concludes with her in the desolate apartment, grappling with raw regret and facing a long, solitary journey toward genuine self-acceptance. David's reaction to my confession was not the explosive anger I half expected, half feared. Instead, it was something far worse. A quiet, profound heartbreak that settled over him like a shroud. He just sat there on the edge of the sofa, my old phone still in his hand, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me, beyond the room. The air in the apartment grew heavy, suffocating. "I can't, Annie," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a razor. "I can't do this. Not again." The jokes, that was one thing. But this, he gestured vaguely at the phone. "At me. This is beyond repair. You didn't just break my trust. You destroyed it, utterly. This is an ultimate disrespect." There was no fire in his eyes, only an ash-gray weariness, a deep resignation. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and in his gaze, I saw the end. He couldn't forgive this. There was no more to say. The following week unfolded in a slow, agonizing process of dissolution. David started moving his things out. Not in a rush, not in a fit of rage, but methodically, piece by painful piece, with the same quiet precision he used to organize his life. First, his clothes from the closet, carefully folded into boxes, then his books, stacked neatly. His small collection of vintage records. Each item taken was a physical manifestation of our life together, unraveling. A thread being snipped. I watched him, sometimes from the doorway, sometimes from a distance, feeling like an observer to my own destruction. The apartment grew emptier, the echoes louder. Our shared space became a barren landscape, mirroring the desolation inside me. The chaos of my personal life seeped into my professional one, a toxic spill that couldn't be contained. My performance at work, once sharp and ambitious, declined sharply under the crushing weight of guilt and despair. My focus was shattered, my energy gone. The office culture, which had once felt so vibrant and welcoming, now turned cold, gossipy, The whispers followed me through the corridors. The averted glances were more frequent. Brenda and Mark, my supposed closest work friends, grew distant, their smiles strained. The fun Annie persona was gone, replaced by a ghost. Then came the meeting with Mr. Sterling. It was short, cold, and entirely predictable. He sat across from me, his expression impassive, the sterile white walls of his office reflecting the harsh reality. "Annie," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, "we've noticed a significant drop in your productivity. There have also been issues with your professional conduct. We've decided to let you go." He handed me an envelope, sealed and final. The very source of the validation, the place where I had sacrificed everything, had now rejected me entirely. I had lost my job. I walked out of Sterling and Finch for the last time, the glass doors sliding shut behind me, the sound like a coffin closing. I had lost my husband. I had lost my career. My reputation, among those who knew, was shattered, scattered like broken glass. I was alone. I sat in the middle of the empty living room of what had once been our apartment, the silence vast and absolute. The sun cast long, hard shadows across the bare floorboards. There were still faint imprints on the carpet where David's armchair had sat. A lighter square on the wall where his framed photograph of Lake Superior used to hang. Staring at these empty spaces, I was forced to confront the full, brutal moral consequences of my pursuit of superficial approval. The laughter I had craved, the attention I had desperately sought, now felt like a bitter, poisonous taste in my mouth. The hollowness of that fun Annie persona was stark, undeniable. It had been a performance, a cheap imitation of genuine happiness, built on the slow, deliberate destruction of something real. David's quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, the genuine, steady goodness he represented. I had sacrificed it all for a few fleeting moments of shallow validation. It wasn't just David I had betrayed, but a fundamental part of myself. The woman who valued stability, honesty, and true connection was gone, buried under layers of deceit and insecurity. Now, only raw regret remained, a constant ache. The path ahead was long, solitary, and steep. There would be no easy fixes, no quick redemption, only the hard, slow work of grappling with what I had done, and perhaps, one day, finding a way to genuine self-acceptance. The apartment was empty, and so was I. The last box of David's things left yesterday, carried by his cousin, not by him. Now, only the echoes of furniture remained, ghost-like indentations on the carpet, lighter patches on the walls where pictures once hung. I sat in the middle of it all, the cold air from the uncurtained window chilling my skin. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the constant chatter I once craved, and the quiet comfort I had so readily dismissed. I had chased a fleeting sense of belonging, a superficial validation, and in doing so, I had dismantled everything truly valuable. David, with his steady kindness, was gone. My career, the very platform on which I'd built my shallow performance, was also gone. There was no fun Annie left, only a woman staring at the wreckage of her own making, grappling with the stark reality of what she had traded for a few laughs. The road ahead felt long, solitary, and paved with bitter lessons. There was no one left to blame but myself, and no easy way back.